what I'm going to talk about in the end will be narrative ethics, but I will also use narrative as a means to an end. I will use storytelling as a means of making my points. And I'll start with this very first story. In 1986, this article that you see here came out in the Washington Post, and it was entitled "The Slippery Ethics of Engineering." And in that article, the author claimed that lethality is part and parcel of the nature of engineering. That what we need to do is to study more about what engineering is, how it is like and how it is distinct from science, and what relationships it actually has, if any, to law and medicine. I wrote that article, and no sooner than I wrote it, I was invited to defend my honor in a meeting with the presidents of the engineering professional societies in America, about 14 of them, that constituted what is now known as the American Association of Engineering Societies. And that meeting began with past president of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers pointing to me saying, "Taft, what you have just done has done more damage to the engineering profession than any other single act in history." We stayed in that meeting for 2.5 hours. And they had the good judgment to take me out and buy me a beer afterwards. When I got back to the university, I had a call in from the dean. The dean said, "You have a call in from the president of the university." I called the president, and he said, "The captains of industry have just demanded your head." And I said, "Mr. President, what did you tell him?" He said, "I told him you had tenure and there's nothing we could do about it." Not long after that, I got another call inviting me to come down to the National Science Foundation to a brown bag lunch. And that what we were going to do was talk about this article. I walked into the brown bag lunch early. The people in there didn't know who I was. I sat down and enjoyed a little discussion among some of them about how it was that they were worried if they would still have their jobs after having that brown bag. Then something incredible happened. An incredible bang on the door came. The door burst open. In came these people. There were news people with camcorders all around the place. And they took over the meeting for a few minutes, while one of them got up and said that this group had just read this book by Eric Drexler, and they did not see any point in spending federal money on research that was going to teach machines how to replicate themselves when that's God's work. I thought that somehow or another there are lessons in this story, how this thing fits together. And I'm going to tell you some stories and put all of this together in the hopes that some good advice, maybe some insight will come to researchers and students who have to deal with the America Competes Act. The nightmare of that act for a researcher is that he or she will have to teach ethics, or at least be responsible for teaching ethics, to their students. The greater nightmare of it all is that the students will have to be taught ethics by their research professors. I changed my title a little bit. Excuse the small letter on mentoring. I don't know how that one happened. But such is the life of researchers. Good ideas come to us in the middle of the night, and those tend to be the better ones. My outline is as follows. I've already given the introduction, and I'm going to ask myself some questions about what it is, if we're going to start at the beginning. If we're going to start at the beginning of a story that's going to wind up being helpful to people who have to deal with this America Competes Act. Just where do we start? And one question, one answer might be the one that H.L.A. Hart, who was a legal scholar, started with when he developed his theory of law, positive law. And that was, if we're going to talk about a society, then we have to talk about the principles that hold it together intact. Otherwise, if the society disintegrates, we have nothing to talk about. So if we're going to talk about society, then one way to talk about it is to talk about three principles. One is that a society is held intact insofar as its members see that it is in their interest to maintain their memberships in that society. Self-interest principle. The second is the common higher cause, and that is that the society has leaders presiding over a common cause the members put higher than self-interest. And lastly, that the leaders command regulatory and defensive forces. The great works on that come to mind at first are that in the self-interest principle, we might want to read again Locke's second treatise on civil government. The higher cause principle, we might want to read again Rousseau's The Social Contract. And in the force principle, we might want to read again Leviathan, Hobbes's Leviathan, Machiavelli's The Prince, and Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Now, all of these books and others like them give us understanding of those principles. Now let's talk about what they mean. What do they mean? How do you get meaning from understanding? And I would argue that we can get meaning from understanding by taking understanding in the context of a story. So I want to tell a story, and in telling that story, I want to put that story in even a larger context that we will call mythic. I'm going to tell a story about my grandparents. Now, when I start this story off and say that it began in 1917, around the time of the First World War, my students, occasionally undergraduate students, will ask me what was the world like then. They were not talking about political circumstances. They were not talking about what it is like to get along without the technologies they have today, namely Blackberries and other devices that intrigued them. They really wanted to know if there were any dinosaurs left and if it had any meaning for them personally. So I told them that this story begins with two of my granduncles who were in that war. I have to make it clear to them that I was not in that war, and who had come back home from Europe to find somehow the mails didn't get through, that their parents were dead, and that the house was full of 8 of their brothers and sisters, and that the oldest, who was one of their sisters, had come back to take care of the others and brought 2 of her kids. So the question for them was, incidentally, not survival. Because when these boys came back, that was my Uncle Roy and my Uncle Thornton, Granduncle Roy, Granduncle Thornton. The issue was, well, we have gotten the taste of the good life. We all want PhDs. How can we do that, taking care of all of these kids? So my grandmother, matriarch as she was at that young age, said, all right, here's what we'll do. There is such a place called a college. And there's one in Oberlin, Ohio that will let you boys in. Why don't you go down there, come back with, and I'll hold the house together. I'll keep food in the kids' stomach, roof over their backs. But when you come back, instead of making your riches, you help the others go to college. Well, they agreed to do that. The first problem they encountered was one of the younger brothers, Uncle Harry, insisted on going with them. He wasn't old enough to go to college. They took him anyway. And they got to Oberlin, and they discovered the most amazing thing for them. that before you could go to college, you had to have tuition. They didn't know about that. So they decided to work, save their money, and then go to college. Well, they worked, they saved their money, and they weren't making enough money to go to college. So they came up with this brilliant idea. They bought a horse. They took the horse over to the college, got an appointment with the academic dean. He let them in and said, okay, what do you boys want? They said, well, Dean, look out the window. And he said, what do you see? The dean said, I see a horse. And they said, we noticed that you have a lot of rich kids at this school, but you don't teach horseback riding. He said, well, that's true. What do you propose to do about it? They said, we'll teach horseback riding. He said, how much would you charge? They said, tuition. Roy came out of there eventually with a degree in engineering from Bucknell. He became the first African-American to become a registered professional engineer in the state of Pennsylvania. He also became the first African-American to become member of the Engineers Club of Philadelphia. Harry went on and got a PhD from the University of Chicago. Thornton became the first African-American to be a big game hunting guide in Canada. They all came back and they helped most of the others, almost all of them, get out and go to college. Now, look at that story from probably definitely one of the, I would say, the top 5 researchers that I would know or know of. His name is Joseph Campbell. And there's a pattern in that story that Joseph Campbell calls the individual way. It's convenient for me to call it the regal way. And that is when the hero hears a call. The hero then decides to answer the call, but in doing so has to go away to unfamiliar places, places that are very unfamiliar and a little exotic. He finds that there is something there that will help everybody. We can call it the Holy Grail. But that it is protected by a terrible dragon. Before the hero takes on the dragon, normally he runs into an old person my age, somebody who usually is bedraggled, sometimes a witch, sometimes an old person, an old crony of some other kind, who tells the hero that, look, the dragon has a weak spot. Maybe there's a missing scale under his tail. If you stab him in there, you've got a good chance. And then the hero takes on the dragon. The hero wins. The hero then brings back the boons to share with everybody. Maybe you see, as I do, that there's a pattern in that follows the Oberlin story pattern. The question is, where was the dragon? The question, where was the old person? The old person was in there. What is the function of all of this? Campbell says the function of the old person, who is the hero helper, is to make sure that by virtue of obedience to him or her, you have learned to make your journey in harmony with nature. The old are in harmony with nature. Not all of the old, but none of the young. And the dragon in their story may well have been the fear of failure. And so that story has psychological significance to us all, because when we face that terrible problem that's in our lives, sometimes we hear a call from the twilight state of mind that not Freud, but his student Carl Jung talked about. Rod Serling talked about with the Twilight Zone, that this is a phase between the conscious and the unconscious state, where the unconscious state is trying to tell you that a missing part of the problem you're trying to solve is a truth that's down here in the unconscious that your conscious mind does not want to hear. To get it out, you have to fight a real dragon. And when you fought that dragon, the question then is, can you bring that truth back to consciousness without damage? After all, it's down there for good reason. And the big problem with bringing it back to consciousness is, can you find a moral resting place for it? Did you do something that's really bad that you don't want to remember? Did your parents do something awful that was really bad that you don't want to remember? And by sharing the goods with everybody, you sort of compensate for all of that, because that's good to share with everybody. So these mythic stories, this mythic story is very important. Let's look at Irene, his sister, who stayed home and took care of the kids. Now, Joseph Campbell calls that way of life the way of the primary mask. That's where an individual, male or female, not just the females, kills herself and therefore transforms herself into some other person called mother, where you care about everybody and you can bring everybody together and commit them to a higher cause than self. When you do that, in Irene's case, the higher cause was family. And that kind of hero then is the kind of hero that provides that particular way of life. You can see it with men playing it. I think a person who gave it a good shot, fictional person, was in Failsafe. You'll remember when the President of the United States discovered that we had bombed Moscow by accident. The question is what to do about it. The answer was to bomb New York City. His family was in New York City, his wife and his kids. I say to my students, think of that character as a person who was in the way of the primary mass. He loved his kids as much as he did you and me. Then, in the popular way, this is the way of life where a person can become a hero by advancing their self-interest. Sounds like a contradiction, but I think you'll see it when you study the life of Socrates. He did not look out for his own self-interest in the sense that he wanted to gain something. He decided he's not fully a human being if he had to live the ill-conditioned life. So we do have heroes in 3 different ways of life, and these heroes are personifications of the 3 principles of social order. The king, the person who slayed the dragon and brought the grail back, is a personification of the force principle. The person who, in my case, Irene, and ask if we have time to talk about it, I can give you more mythic stories, all the way back to Osiris, Horus, and Isis. They're telling the same stories. Irene was the personification of the hero of the higher cause principle, and Harry, a belligerent sort, who was a person who belonged to a faculty since he was about 14 years old, was a professor from day one. He died in the position of professor at Howard University. Now, in mentoring, I gave a thought to giving a talk on this when invited to do so back in the academic year 2005-2006. In that year, I was teaching at MIT. I was teaching a doctoral level course called Engineering Ethics. And the graduate student council invited me to come and give a talk to the graduate students. I said, okay, I'll talk to them about it. And I went in there and I told them that, well, if you are a person who lives in the way, in the popular way, you're an individual, you respect reason over the will, and if in that position, then you will probably choose a style that I call the German research model. If that fails to live up to what the German research model really is, it does live up very much to what it represents today in the United States. That is a professor who says, all right, we'll agree on your research topic, and now you're on your own. Okay. And there are many people who don't want to be bothered by a professor, wants to call the professor when he or she has a question every now and then, wants to present results and get that thing all out of the way. A person who is in the way of the primary mask will probably like a collaborative style. Let's you, the student, me, the professor, sit down and be more or less equals in this project. We're going to work together maybe every day for a while. That you'll call me when you have problems, I'll call you when I have problems. We'll sort of work that thing out. And the last is the master apprentice style, where the professor says, okay, you come in here today and do problem number 1. Next week, you show me your solution to problem number 1, and I'll give you a problem number 2. And after that, somewhere along the line, the dissertation is done and you've got your degree. That's a nightmare for a lot of people. I've met many people who can see it no other way. The professor is the master, and I have learned from him. And now I can be like him and take his place. And I'm about ready to close that one. And I must tell you that after giving that lecture, the place, I think pandemonium is too strong a word. But it became highly animated because the students pointed to each one of these and they showed where they were one of those and how the professor was a different one. And that was the cause of the nightmare. You want a collaborative relationship and that professor is saying, don't see me but once a month at most. That was the nightmare. Was that an ethical problem? Well, it looks like I'm running out of time. But I'll just give you a brief look at the bullets. And if Q&A will be happy, then fine. Otherwise, the good news is that I've got the full paper here in Suzanne's hands. So we are looking at mentoring processes where you don't have to just use one of these styles. You can arrange different styles in an order towards a developmental end. Another one is that the Greek approach is one that's going to put, when you start teaching ethics, you can use a Greek approach, which puts reason above the will. You can use a Roman approach, which is more concerned about codes of ethics and regulations and compliance with codes of ethics and regulations, not so much theory. And there's a non-Western ethics, which actually says that you put a person in your position, work that person out in your position, and do what that person would do. In the Greek tradition, that's a person who just has an instinct for the right or the wrong way. What I did was to use a tradition keeper out of Africa to talk about how it is that that's what engineers do. And lastly, I made reference to a paper by a person named Jay Shummer and another person. Is that the same person that's here with us today? Byrne, where the kind of story that you used was a science fiction story. And in the science fiction story, therefore, you could talk about hypothetical cases and analyze them ethically. What I was interested in doing is what I'm interested in doing is putting a mythic character in there, particularly one who does not correspond exactly to what the Greeks think is rational, someone who might put the will above reason and show that that's the way things work out for engineers. I call that non-Western. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think you see the pattern that I was looking for. All of these are different phases of the first three. Thank you.